Alex, the jury's heard about testimony of you stealing client funds. Did you do that?
I did.
Alec Murdaugh admitted during his double murder trial that he stole money from his clients and his law firm. Now he'll admit to it again, this time in federal court, raising the question, what does Alec Murdaugh know about corruption in South Carolina, and could it involve judges? Thanks for joining us here on Law and Crime. I'm Angenette Levy. Next month, Alec Murdaugh will change his plea in federal court, meaning he'll plead guilty to some charges. We don't know which ones. Earlier this year, a federal grand jury indicted Murdaugh on 22 counts, including wire fraud, bank fraud, and money laundering. The feds say Murdaugh devised a number of schemes to steal millions starting in 2005. It's not clear what charges Murdaugh will plead to in federal court, but it raises the question about what Murdaugh may have told the FBI and SLED, not just about the theft of funds, but possibly other things, such as corruption. FITSNews, citing well-placed sources, reports that significant progress has been made in corruption cases involving judges with ties to Alec Murdaugh. I spoke with FITSNews owner and editor-in-chief Will Folks about Alec Murdaugh's upcoming guilty plea and what he may have offered prosecutors as he tried to make a deal. Well, we know that Alec Murdaugh is going to change his plea in federal court later this month. So what has he been doing? It sounds like his attorneys may have alluded to the fact in some prior hearings that Alec Murdaugh may have been cooperating with the feds for quite some time.
I mean, that is certainly one of the theories that's out there. And again, as we've reported for more than 2 years now, his attorneys obviously have very close relationships with federal prosecutors and have been angling to get Murdaugh well positioned with the feds to avoid consequences on the state side of the criminal equation. So that's certainly a theory that's out there, and I think we may see that bear some fruit in the weeks to come.
Did they do this because they want him to serve his time in a federal prison?
Well, if you haven't been inside a level 3 maximum security prison in South Carolina, they are not the prettiest places to go. In fact, there was a riot a few years back at Lee Correctional Facility in one of the rural parts of South Carolina. It was the deadliest prison riot in America in a quarter century. So these are some brutal places. These are some very dangerous places. Now, Murdaugh, obviously, given his status as one of these 2 dozen or so, close custody inmates, he's not quite in that level of harm as it relates to his placement within the correctional system. But absolutely, they are trying to get him out of the state system and into the federal system. But again, that's only going to be possible, Angenette, if the murder convictions are somehow overturned. That's when all of this comes into play. If there is, for some reason, an overturn of those murder convictions at the state level, that's why Murdaugh's attorneys are rushing to the feds to try to get a deal done quickly.
Murdaugh still faces more than 99 financial crimes charges on the state level. Trial dates on those cases have not yet been set. So why the rush to plead guilty in federal court? Murdaugh was just indicted in May. At that time, his lawyers said they hoped to resolve the case soon. Could a possible benefit be the possibility that Alec Murdaugh could be moved to a federal prison, which might have better conditions than state prisons? Folks says no.
The state of South Carolina will never give up Alec Murdaugh. In fact, I think we've seen over the last few weeks this prosecutorial tension between the state and the feds here in South Carolina just escalate to a level I haven't seen it before since covering this case. And again, they weren't exactly on the same page when all this started. So, but that tension has really escalated.
What leverage does he have for a plea deal on these financial crimes in federal court? What information does he have that's of value? You did some reporting recently talking about judges and the fact that there are likely corrupt judges out there that he may have been connected to.
Well, absolutely. And it's not just the judges he's connected to. We're also looking at some of his connections to the drug smuggling empire that, in fact, built the South Carolina Lowcountry. A lot of people don't know that, but Hilton Head Island and a lot of the development down there was built by revenues from the drug trade. So it's an interesting little part of our history here in the Palmetto State. Might explain one of the reasons why things are so corrupt down there. But, Murdaugh's connections to some of these drug dealers is starting to come out. We reported a lot on it back in the fall of 2021. particularly a gentleman by the name of Barrett Bowler. Now, it's spelled Bolware, but in South Carolina, where we pronounce everything a little crazy, it's pronounced Bowler. But this is a guy who was implicated in Operation Jackpot back in the 1980s, the big Department of Justice crackdown that made a name for our current governor, Henry McMaster, who was then a federal prosecutor. But Barrett Bowler was actually charged in connection with Operation Jackpot, was facing drug smuggling charges. This is a guy who was joined at the hip with Alec Murdaugh. They were friends, business associates. Alec Murdaugh had his power of attorney right before Bowler died in 2018. And of course, Barrett Bowler was the owner of Moselle. It was Barrett Bowler who sold Moselle to Alec Murdaugh. So some deep connections there between those two individuals. And Bowler is very integrally linked to this investigation into the judges. So it's just another layer connecting Murdaugh to some seriously elevated levels of criminality.
Barrett Boulware's name came up during Murdaugh's double murder trial.
You're obviously a member of this law firm, and your review of the records as all of this came to light, did that conversation take place around the time that the defendant was stealing some of Barrett's money?
Yes.
Did you ever have a conversation with the defendant about Barrett Boulware needing money because of his illness?
And you're referring to, yes, I did I believe it would have been June of 2018.
Folks reported on the names of those two judges in the 14th Judicial Circuit that have ties to Murdaugh. The 14th Circuit covers the area where the Murdaughs wielded tremendous power for decades. Folks says there are other judges under scrutiny in several levels of the judiciary for a number of crimes.
Well, greasing the palms is just the beginning of it. I mean, we're hearing stories of procuring prostitutes, access to gambling, all sorts of stuff. And certainly everyone's familiar with the judges that we've all talked about related to this case. Carmen Mullen, a circuit court judge down in the 14th Circuit. Perry Buckner, another circuit court judge down there in the circuit where the Murdaugh's firm was located. But there are other judges that the feds are looking at. And I want to point out, Angenette, this is something we reported on this back in December of 2021, that this was a part of the federal investigation and of the state investigation. And I want to make it clear that it's not just the feds who are looking into these corrupt judges. Back in December 2021, when we first reported on it, state prosecutors indicated that they were taking an aggressive leadership role, in fact, in this part of the investigation. So I want to make it clear to everybody watching, it's not just the feds, state investigators and prosecutors are tracking down these corrupt judges as well.
I've reached out to both Judge Buckner and Judge Mullen. At the time of this recording, they have not returned my email. Folks says the judges he named signed off on some of the settlements for which Murdaugh is accused of orchestrating schemes.
They're basic, fundamental oversight obligations that, at the very least, they were looking the other way. And as you said, there's also that possibility that maybe they were getting something in addition to just looking the other way. So I think that's the kind of conduct that they're looking for. But, I've talked to lawyers all over South Carolina for years. And Angenette, they told me, hey, we just don't even go down to the 14th Circuit because it's rigged. There's no way we can win down there. If the Murdaughs bring a case there, there's nothing we can do. Just wave the white flag.
Back to the friction folks mentioned between state and federal investigators and prosecutors involving those financial crimes cases.
Ordinarily, it would be a situation where I think an agreement would be reached, but in this case, they are clearly going to move forward. It is nobody's going to give an inch on this on either side. And I think when Creighton Waters appeared again last week in Kingstree at the plea hearing for one of Murdaugh's co-conspirators on the financial crimes, Corey Fleming, he made it absolutely clear this is a state case. The misconduct was in state courts, on state settlements, before state judges. He kept repeating it over and over, getting the litany going, sending a clear message to the feds to back off.
Alec Murdaugh will be back in court next month twice, once for a state case and the second in federal court, where he will change his plea on September 21st. He remains in protective custody in prison in South Carolina, where he's serving 2 life sentences for the murders of his wife Maggie and son Paul. Murdaugh is appealing those convictions. For Law and Crime, I'm Angenette Levy.